Gentlemen, this is Tuesday, the 9th of July, 2019, and this discussion, this meeting, is at the Deewhy RSL sub-branch, and the reason for the meeting is a request from Bob Dunnett, who sends his warmest regards from Europe, to record some of the background for knowing what happened at Skeggs Redlands in the early to mid 1970s, and some of the work that was done afterwards, and the reconstruction and re-establishment of the school. Bob's view, and it is his request that we meet, Bob's view is that this needs to be recorded for a number of reasons. One, that it needs not to be forgotten, it must be remembered. Two, he has regarded the reconstruction and the redevelopment of Redlands as being a part of his own life's work, so to speak, with everyone else. Thirdly, that schools of themselves are among the few organisations that last more than, say, 100 years or more than 150 years. Universities and schools are among the oldest surviving institutions in the world. And so Redlands is part of that. Correct. And we would hope that, and Bob particularly would hope, that that would continue to be so for the years ahead, and so on. The final point, though, is that at the present time, there is a group of us, with Bob leading in this particular case as well, to argue with the current Skeggs Redlands board that the actual arrangements at Skeggs Redlands, the board, need to be altered immediately. Part of the reason for that, of course, is that there is a new constitution being considered for the company, not for the school itself, but for the company. Secondly, there is a new headmaster coming in January who understands that everything is absolutely according to the discussions that they have had with him, and that may or may not be so, depending on the view of the law. And thirdly, because we all wish Redlands totally well. Then, further than that, we also Bob asked Max Hector to join us because of the reconstruction of ACP, the Australian College of Physical Education, then situated at Sydney Olympic Park, and subsequently it was worked on. Redlands bought ACPE out of administration essentially as an act of recovery more than anything else. But then, of course, it was an act of education. So that's why we're here, and I need to make that very clear at the very beginning. It is not about the current school. It is about what was done, what was achieved, how reconstruction occurred, and then with ACPE in the 1990s and so on right through. And the last time I know anything particularly about Redlands in fine detail is 2002 to early 2003. So it's not about this current period at all. It's about what was done and how it was done. So that's really, and Bob's greeting, that's why we're here. And thank you very much, obviously, on behalf of Bob and myself, clearly. Thank you very much for being here. So what we'd like to do is to just have the individuals, the four men, invited men, just give autobiographical summaries, direct to camera, I think, or just to us, if you like, because those who have followed us into the school need also to understand a very important feature of what I understand, having worked in the school for 20 or more years. It was surprising to me to come out of Newcastle Boys High School, which I look back on with, I mean, did I really know I was there? No, I didn't. It was not, school wasn't my best world. Then to go on to university and then postgraduate work and so on, and eventually to arrive at Redlands and to see essentially non-independent school people, men and women alike, non-independent school men and women alike, taking the school in a failed state or a collapsed state and rebuilding it. And I came to understand over 20 years the power of that activity. And so there's that side of it too. And the autobiographies are very important, brief, but nonetheless important. And what I've suggested is that you might like to comment on your own background at school, where you went to school, and anything else you'd like to have on tape, on record. So could I, John, would you like to start, please?
Yes, I'd be very happy to, Peter. I need to say it's 40 years since we became very active in the school. Our need to take a different attitude as parents of the school came about through the difficulty of the school. So let me start off with something that I did as a very short letter or short address to the alumni 12 months ago when I was invited to come along by Carolyn, the secretary of the alumni. Can't tell you the date, but we can look it up and record it for you. My very dear Redland friends, thank you, Carolyn, for inviting me this evening to celebrate with you 2 anniversaries so vital to our school's past life and your inheritance of this school's continuance. Firstly, let me advise you that I learned in 1974 that the Skeggs Schools Group were in trouble, and in fact they were insolvent. We had at Redlands some 680 students, and I had even heard that Shore School had invited the girls of Form 12 to sit their end of the school examinations in order to ensure their university entry opportunity would continue. Just imagine, colleagues, the possibility of that school helping the girls of Redlands. Imagine also what would happen to the girls of the other forms from all of the Skeggs groups being bereft of their planned school life if Redlands were to close. It so happened that Messrs. Adams, Lang and Roberts were the P&C executive members of the school, and when the P&C met and we explained the difficulty of the day, these 3 men were challenged to find a way to ensure that Redlands could be saved and continued. The 3 daddies were just ordinary family members, just ordinary community members, but they were ex-service veterans who recognised a challenge and said, as they would in the services, to their generals, "Yes, sir," meaning we will give it our best shot now, immediately. It so happened that the generals on this occasion were our wives. Just imagine then that our 90-year-old school would need to be restarted again, and so we devised a business plan to acquire the school, making sure we continued the education program, which was the main reason for the students, our children's present at the school, to ensure that the traditions and culture of the school would be continued. However, the school must also be run as a business, owned and managed only by the parents over the many centuries ahead. Tonight I am happy to note that the school is still flourishing in its 134th year. 43 years after our acquisition, and now I would like to tell you about some of the trials and troubles we faced, over the many successes we faced, and about our wonderful staff members and parents, some of whom tried to take us over, yet failed because they did not understand the educational model we were developing. We did realise that having lost about 500 students in 1975, that student recruitment would become a very slow process and could undo our new business plan of 1976. Thus we had to add some further firepower into our plan and as well to recruit. We also had to recruit a new head of school. There was even consideration that students from Darlinghurst might need to join and merge with Redlands at Cremorne. To cut the story short, we hired Mr. Cordish in the early 80s, just as we commenced bringing back boys to the school after many, many, many years, and I emphasise that. It was wonderful to see the plan that was to bring the boys into the school year by year from the lower primary forms, and so I rejoiced in the third year to find we had tots in forms 1, 2 and 3, but we also had one boy who to me almost looked 6 foot tall in form 11 or 12. And I realised then that our business plan would now prevail. You would all have been proud in 1988-89 if you looked at both our our current student register as well as our then waiting list. For the second document was the reason to purchase our second campus just up the road, when we spent another $15 million in accommodation to accommodate all on both sides of Military Road frontage. Some of you may remember that our Governor, Professor Maria Bashir, also was a member of a parent of our school in those early days. Is there any reason to believe we then would wish to continue our expansion into the Snowy Mountains and even later to ACPE? Well, there was, because we had a unique opportunity to acquire a Canberra hospitality property of demountable buildings, which we sent to both Cremorne and Jindabyne. Our student register at our 4 campuses now was numbering almost 2,000 as we edged into the late 90s. What a difference after 686 students had closed out in 1975. I would like to say thank you to all our directors, to Mr. Cordish especially and his staff members, the wonderful parents, and all of our students who have been a part of the life of the Redlands School from 1976 onwards, for I have really only skipped over the past 42 years. Now I would like to leave you with 3 principles that have provided my school goals for Redlands. In my business life, spread across 25% of the international world, and in which I was continuously travelling, to give you the first principle, it came out of South Africa, where I saw these wonderful words. One with God is a majority. The second was from a book written by a close business executive who asked me to do the prefix, and it was called Nothing is Impossible. And the third item was taught to me by Mr. Peter Cordish. Failure is not an option. So, as you can see, I would like to leave you with, let your light shine, and may God bless us all as this school is continued into many centuries to come, as it's guided by the new parent company. And thank you for inviting me back to the school tonight.
Thanks, John. We'll find the date. We'll get the date for that address. Thank you very much. Excuse me. Sorry, John. Thank you. Tough. I can assure you that I was on the staff of Shaw at the time of the collapse of the girls' schools, and the headmaster called us all to the common room and with tears in his eyes told us of the collapse of the Anglican girls' schools, and that the girls would be invited to come to Shaw to do those final exams. But he also made the point that he thought that Darlinghurst girls would be invited to join Shaw, but we would have to put a fence across the middle of the school to ensure that the Shaw boys and Darlinghurst girls didn't blend in any way. It was the most extraordinary afternoon. But it was a very upsetting time. It was seriously upsetting time. And I remember that with very great clarity because I couldn't understand. I thought, what is the problem? Why aren't they fixing it? So that was, well, why would it be allowed to continue? The second I'd like to ask is, John Roberts, autobiographical view, where you were at school and what you would like to tell us about yourself.
Well, my secondary education was at Neutral Bay Intermediate High School, where students only studied up to what was then the intermediate certificate. If they were successful in obtaining the intermediate certificate, they were eligible then to move on to North Sydney Boys High School for the final 2 years, completing the 5-year secondary education. And that's the process I followed. Then in 1935, I went into employment. So, my wife had attended Skeggs Darlinghurst, and she had enjoyed the schooling there, and she hoped that her 3 daughters could continue. So we enrolled number 1 at Skeggs Redlands because the travel across the harbour to the eastern suburbs seemed unnecessary for a young child. Then as a couple of years went by, we were so happy with Redlands and our daughter was settled that then our second daughter, of course, was sent to Redlands to be with her sister. And then the third one in due course went to Redlands also. So that was my connection with Redlands School. And at one stage then, a father at Redlands felt there should be a Parents and Friends Association. This was not happily received as an idea by the Skeggs Council, but John Waddy, who was the father, an ex-Spitfire fighter pilot, a Member of Parliament representing North Sydney, persisted, and so a meeting was called of parents to form such an association. I attended that meeting and the parents prevailed. They insisted they wanted an association. So then in later years, 1974, when it became obvious that the Skeggs group was in financial difficulty, Redlands had a parents' body ready, willing and able to act straight away. And that is what they did. They called, the association did, called a meeting of all parents to explain the difficulties the school was in. And the parents at that meeting appointed a subcommittee to take whatever steps they could to ensure that Redlands continued as a school. And that meeting, the association at that time was the president was myself, the secretary was John Lang, and a member at the meeting was Bruce Adams. And we were appointed, the committee, to do what we could to save the school. And we accepted the appointment and took on the challenge. And so that was the early days. And as I say, when the school did get into financial trouble, that committee was ready to act.
John, could I just ask, why was the Skeggs Council, why would it have been opposed to the idea of a parent and friends group? Do you have, did anyone ever express why they would feel that way?
They did not like the thought of parents interfering in any way in the conduct of the school.
I see, right.
They ensured that in the Parents and Friends constitution that they included clauses that the parents were in no way to interfere with staff or management.
And Mrs. Humphrey, the quite famous Mrs. Humphreys was the head. She was the headmistress, wasn't she?
Mrs. Humphrey was the headmistress. Yeah. Mrs. Humphrey was the headmistress for 28 years.
She supported the P&F idea, obviously, I imagine.
She approved it and supported it.
Yeah.
Having to deal with John Waddy, you would understand.
Yes. Yes.
Then one day, Mrs. Humphrey received a visit from the chairman of the Skeggs Council, and he came to tell her that he requested her resignation after 28 years. And she had no option, because in those days headmistresses did not have any contract, and they only received 3/4 of the salary that a male headmaster received.
Right, yes, yes.
So she had to accept. And when the chairman received her resignation on the spot in her office, his next movement was to go down to the staff room, approach the deputy headmistress and ask her, would you take over the school as acting headmistress? Which is what happened. And of course that news got around very quickly.
Yes.
And it was obvious that Redlands was to close. And the intention, of course, was for Redlands to close, be sold, and the proceeds used to help Skeggs group of schools get out of financial problems.
Right. As it came to pass, the schools that closed were Skeggs Moss Vale, is that right? Skeggs Moss Vale, I think that's right.
Yes, in the future.
Yes.
Wollongong.
But that was,
Wollongong as well. Yes.
Yes. They became the Illawarra Grammar School.
Right.
The little one down at Locust Valley was taken over by another section of the church.
Right. Very difficult times. And yes, thank you for that.
So
Thanks. Sorry?
But the main point, though, to follow on there was that the Parents and Friends Association were invited to take over management and control of Redlands School, which we accepted.
That was some time further on?
Yes.
Yes.
We were 2 years in that period of 73, 74, trying to find out what had happened. We had, of course, to worry about the bankers, and that was quite a funny opportunity. Then we also had to look at the people who were the chartered accountants who were trying to steady the school along, not to help it find a buyer or anything like that, but to try and find some way around the problem, because nobody had an answer, because they had no problem.
No,
unfortunately.
it was someone else's problem, but they were just managerially involved.
They didn't realise it.
Yeah.
It's interesting to observe that our attitude of coming into the school was we came in to run a business. They came in to run a school, or they had been there to run a school. And they're different things. And I must say, looking at a lot of schools, they're just moderate schools. They've made no real program because they don't have any business sense of getting schools on.
It's how the whole comes together as one movement forward, really.
As you could see, for example, we did in the one stage go to look at the small school at the church at Mossman. It was a boys' prep school.
Right.
In fact, it was a prep school theoretically, for sure.
Yes.
And we did not get any joy from them.
No.
But we were very conscious of the fact that amongst our fellow parents were some past parents, including some who were boys. And there was Basil Phillips of Cremorne, and I happen to have some records of him when he was one of the boys going back many years ago.
Attending Redlands.
Yes. So that, and then he had I think he had 4 or 5 female children, and they were all coming to Redlands. And whilst there were no more Phillips boys available to come to Redlands, we did look for his support, and he was one of the parents who stuck with us.
Excellent. Just as we go, if I could just comment, one of the issues at the present time, from an external point of view, is that at the recent, or the April AGM of Skeggs Redlands Limited, and correctly well regarded Headmaster Peter Lennox was speaking towards the end of his remarks. But he made the point that the school has a deliberate policy of equal numbers of boys and girls, and they're within 5 girls of being equal numbers of boys and girls. So there is actually, in my terms, there is an exclusion policy for boys. And I asked at a recent event, someone else associated with this, and said, what is the position on this? And the view is that the school will not allow a boy to enter the school who doesn't already have a sibling sister in the school. And that way they are hoping to ensure that they have 50-50 boys and girls. Now, in my time working with you men and for you, my understanding is that we never ever applied any such view of the world. It was very much an open access, because in the end we saw brothers bring sisters and sisters bring brothers to the same school, and that was the family school model that I had picked up on the first day in office as headmaster, that it was a family environment. Didn't always work. Some of the boys went off to shore, some went to Winona, some of the girls went to Winona. It didn't matter. In the end, the achievement was that there was never any manipulation intentional manipulation, at least I would be fair to say, of that gender of the school, and the family concept was a core policy that we maintained. Thank you, John. Thank you, John.
Could I just add to that before you go away from it? I must say, under a business plan, you built the properties to accommodate the students, because there's nothing worse than to have no customers.
Yes.
And that was our goal, was to stack up and get more and more people. We could go and rent a property down the street, put another 50 students in, and then build a place. And that ought to be the way it's carried on, not necessarily, we can't take you today, no, there's no room this week for the next.
Absolutely, yes.
You know, it's got to be part of the school.
Yes.
This is the school of Cremorne, or a couple more surrounding us, but they're losing the plot. And I use that word carefully because I understand the value of a customer.
Yes. Well, yes, and speaking now from the headmastering point of view as well, it is also a question of having the confidence not to worry about the gender, the gender components of the school. So you can actually, as long as your staff, your colleagues are working towards the goal, HSC, IB, university, so whatever it is, there should be no problem at all.
Well, let's hope we can fix that problem, or recommend that problem be adopted.
That's what part of today is about, yes. Bruce, over to you. At school, and then we're from there.
I got involved because my daughters were there, and my wife was working on the canteen, and we thought it was a good school, so we were supportive. I was evacuated from Sydney when the Japanese put a rocket into Rose Bay. I was sent to Canada and left school at 15, and no correspondence papers came, so I went back to Sydney. At 15, went to work in real estate, became a director of that company. When Darlinghurst bought all this property to develop what they thought was like St Andrew's School, and the attitude of the parents at the school was the Lord would provide the repayments because they didn't make their mortgage repayments to the bank. And I ended up selling some 20 houses with Darlinghurst support. And the houses were virtually not readily saleable because they were controlled tenants, and that area was full of the ladies of the night.
Yes. Front page, Sydney Morning Herald, that story.
And I took an active interest in the school. Which I found was a learning curve, and enjoyed it.
Well, you're on the board for how long? Were you
27 years.
27 years.
And in 27 years I learned all about schools and still take an interest in schools.
Absolutely. Well, grandchildren notwithstanding aside.
And of course, my eldest daughter had all her children at SCIGs. To which they felt an interest, and the grandchildren would like their children to go to SCIGs if they could, but there's a waiting list now.
No priorities.
No priorities.
No priorities. Okay. Well, and the fees are quite serious too at the moment, I think.
Yes, they are.
I had a look back at the fees in 2001. I have all this stuff at home that I'm working on, and 2001, proportional to income, the fees were much lower than proportional to income now. But that's at the mean. It doesn't matter. Right? That's as it is. How did you?
That is important. You may not realise it, but we had no money to buy this school,
No.
and money isn't important. It didn't have to be important. First of all, we had to save the school.
Yes.
And that was the goal that we just have to go on. And as you will remember, we didn't have the money to buy the demountable buildings we did from Canberra
No.
to do what we did in the school. We didn't have the money to buy the building down the road, the second major campus. We didn't have the money to put into Jindabyne or those other places. Money is not the important part. In fact, this school today, with 100 plus million, there's no problem about that.
No.
Just get their business goals set straight.
Yes.
And you'll go on and you'll make all the money in the world you want.
And the enrolments continue to be there.
Absolutely.
Yes. How did your daughters feel about the collapse in 1974 to 76? What was the feeling at home among the daughters?
Mine was happy enough, but they realised. Well, Kerry finished fairly soon after, but Debbie, she stayed around for some years, and she accepted it, but it was a hell of a shock. In 75, when all of a sudden 500 kids dropped out of the school.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
How did your daughters feel, John? Do you remember?
Didn't see any major reaction. They just knew that their dad was involved in trying to save the school. They liked the school. They were in their groove, and so maybe they didn't imagine failure.
Yeah. No. Well, they're young enough to have the optimism of things,
Yes.
of course.
He had one blessing when Lynette's father, when Lynette's father passed on. Her father bequeathed his house to the school at that time, which we sold.
Did you know him, Bruce?
No, I didn't.
Did anyone? No. Did you meet him at all? Is it John Fowle?
Yes.
Lynette Fowle's father.
Oh, Mr. Farr.
Mr. Fowle. Did anyone know him at all?
No, I
He was just out of the blue.
never met him. No, he. This is not going on record, is it?
Yes, it is. Yes,
Oh,
but it doesn't. But it can
oh,
be
he-
taken. So don't worry about that. It's okay.
By a strange coincidence, his solicitor had been connected with the school through his wife. So, Mr. Fowle decided that in making his will, he would not leave assets to his widow. And so he had lost a daughter while she was still a pupil, Lynette, and he was so impressed with the reaction at the school to the death of his daughter that he decided he would make the school his beneficiary. Consequently, his home at Mosman became an asset for the school to be sold, and that gave us the initial deposit.
Magnificent. Just for the record also, I took the liberty of asking about the Lynette Fowle Memorial Garden that had been established, if you remember, opposite the back door of the canteen.
Rose Garden.
The Rose Garden. And it was opposite the door of the canteen because the canteen's role in the 1974, 75, 76 finding out about it all and getting all that and so on, And the school appears to have forgotten Lynette Farr altogether. The garden has been buried is under a building, sort of. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not being,
Yes.
I'm trying just to be very clear. So I was extremely glad that I was able to remind the current headmaster that gift was there, that the memorial garden had been established. It was dedicated by Brian Richardson at the time, and therefore it was a dedicated space. Obviously it got lost, the idea and the understanding got lost, but the chairwoman, currently, the chairperson currently, undertook to do something about that towards the end of that AGM. I would like that to be on record, because I take the point absolutely about the bequest, and it appears actually in the accounts, I think, at the time. It would, wouldn't it? It's recorded as a special gift or something of that sort. So, and again, as Bob would say if he were here, those things must not be forgotten. And thank you for raising it, Bruce. That's tremendous. Could I just ask you, the front page photographs of the brothels in Darlinghurst that were owned by the church,
Yes.
were famous photographs. When you were working in that area of the distribution, yes, how did that affect the whole real estate side of it?
Well, there were a lot of real estate developers and dealers around then, and we put them to auction and sold them at good prices.
Right.
And mostly they were unsaleable because they had controlled tenants in them.
Yes.
And the ladies of the night, they just disappeared.
Right. Really? Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Darlinghurst Police were strange. They were an organisation that seemed to know what was going on in the area, and they didn't want any more in the area, so they just disappeared.
Yes.
Because when I had the houses for inspection, they weren't there.
Peter,
Moving right along.
Peter, if I could bring it back, I'm glad you reminded that. This should be a public function when it's reinstated.
Yes. Yes.
And we should all gather.
Yes.
But
Absolutely.
that was the initial key to turning the money.
Yes. Well, I have to say, I mean, part of the picture as I was coming down the hill this morning, I mean, part of the memory of that garden was that it was also dug up and planted by Noel.
Yes.
Noel Winter, yes. And he did it personally because of the way
Yes.
that he had explained to him that the school was, in inverted commas, saved in part by that gift. So Noel dug it up. He's now, of course, as you know, he's now deceased. And it also was the entrance point to the prep. So the prep kids would coming into school in the morning would go past. So these things must not be let go, I think. So that's very good, Bruce. Thank you, and thank you for mentioning it. Along the way, after the original re-establishment, in my term reconstruction of Redlands commenced, during the time that I had the privilege of being headmaster and executive headmaster of the school, I worked with, as I said in one of my remarks and speech tonight, some of the angels of the industry, some of the angels of teaching. And one of them was Martin Longhurst, who was the director of games at the school over a very long period of time. He came in various roles. And one morning, Max reminded me earlier today, but one morning we were sitting in a meeting and he announced that ACPE, the Australian College of Physical Education, had gone into receivership and it was moving into administration. And he was quite tearful about it. He was quite upset. But Martin doesn't get upset about it very much. And that was just important. But it was then decided, I rang John Lang as chairman and said, look, this is the story. And in his inimitable manner, John said, we must try to get that, we'll try to bring it into the group, which of course ultimately occurred, and for by various means, and all very, very straight and upright means. But it came out of administration, and ACPE, my first memory of numbers was that at the time we took over, there were 69 undergraduates and 54 staff on the listings. So it was really unlikely that it was going to do very well. However, at Redlands at the time, working in a capacity within the foundation and various other, particularly guidance area, was Max Hector. And Max had come out of a business background, quite an extensive business background, was known to members of the board and regarded very highly, had joined us and was working on the foundation, and ultimately was asked if he would be prepared to take up the role of CEO of ACPE in its very parlous state, but in the middle of Sydney Olympic Park, which was a spectacular place to be. And so it was thought, and we're very happy that Max would join us this morning just to be part of this discussion. But if I could ask Max just to give a bit of background, autobiographical background, it'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I've enjoyed sitting here listening to the history of Redlands and these founding fathers and their comments. I'm a very different story because I came in very late in the picture, and I didn't start in Redlands until September 1998, just as Peter has outlined. Briefly, my background is that I had 18 years in secondary education as an economics and commerce teacher, and I taught for the New South Wales education system, the Scots College in Sydney, the Commonwealth Teaching Service down in Canberra. I had a year in British Columbia in Canada and 2 years in Ontario near Niagara Falls in Canada. I then went into retailing for Amber Tiles in Sydney with 9 outlets selling tiles and paving bricks, and became the general manager there, and I had 12 years in retail business. And then I went into manufacturing lottery ticket machines, and I used to send them via plane across to Kentucky, to the Kentucky State Lottery Corporation, and I did that for 3 years, and that gave me manufacturing experience. So the moment that Peter saw me, just mentioned me, in September 98, I was sitting in a Monday morning Peter Cornish management conference. The name came up that ACP was for sale, and you should have seen the energy that hit Peter Cornish at that second, because he saw the opportunity, had the foresight to see the opportunity, that there was something good there, and no doubt he put a lot of influence on particularly John Lang to get the board to buy the college. So that's how I come into the system.
Thanks, Max, very much. And that makes important the statement or the view that the resurgence of Redlands also was to do with the education thinking behind the school. For example, if I just ask, when I first met the board in interview, the question of Latin in the curriculum arose. How did that come to be important? What was the...
All hell broke loose. We had hired a gentleman, and I need to say he had been shocked to us with his experience and so on. And I won't go on with background to him, but anyway, we found a reason for him to go, and one of the reasons, there were 3 or 4 reasons, one of them was got rid of Latin. He had made a decision without the board's authority to cut out Latin. And I take that as because he only had junior education processes, and I assume that junior headmasters don't necessarily have to have Latin.
No,
and so there we go. And that was the case, and we had another little difficulty there because he had a very close friend called St John, who was a QC. Of course, when we sacked the man, there was another little stance for us to go through and solve that problem. But the fact that we cut out Latin got to 2 people. I think he'd gone before you. Oh, yes, he would have gone. One was, our lawyer guy of the day, Austin Rudge at that time. And he got hold of it, gave me a workout about no Latin in this school. So obviously I went off. But that was the second person, and that really cut across, because what he was doing, developing the school okay and helping them work it up, but he was only interested in the juniors, really.
Yes.
And as I seem to remember, much later in your period, we had something like 60 odd subjects in focus, which is a long way removed from I think about 10 or 12 subjects in the schools. Yes. So, look, I won't give you his name now.
No.
We know who it was, and I'm sure you'll find it and you can add it in.
Yes, but the idea of Latin was part of the educational model, wasn't it? It was part of the original thinking.
It was the first subject for the model for the seniors in school.
Yes. Well, intriguingly, part of the submissions on the new constitution were due in by Friday night at 5 o'clock, or by midnight, and many have gone in, apparently. I mean, I don't know the numbers, obviously, but I do know the people who've sent a lot of them in. Part of my own reading came about that the new constitution that is proposed by the current board excludes item 1.1a of the old Memo and Articles of Association, which is that the objects of the company are to acquire and maintain, I think it's some phrase like that, Skeggs Redlands, essentially. And then number 2 was an education of the highest order and quality, and number 3 was to retain the school in its Anglican character. The new constitution has erased item number 1, and I've made it very clear that in my submission that should be acknowledged within the new constitution and not be erased at all. That the original object of Skeggs Redlands Limited was to save the school, basically, and the second was curriculum, and the third was Anglican faith, or Anglican expression of faith at least, and the first has been erased. So there is a lot to be argued, I think, in that fine detail about this proposed constitution that is now on the table. But that one was very important, and the second one is that I think in the time that we worked, that I worked in Redlands anyway, certainly we worked together in Redlands, the second object was never forgotten, was never lost sight of, and that was why the inclusion of Latin right through, I mean, we never ever thought of getting rid of it, but for example, but adding Japanese, adding Mandarin, multiple levels of mathematics, it just grew and grew, all essentially for the children. It had nothing much to do with anything else. It was just
the educational process.
Yeah. And from the educational process, and alongside it was the financial process, and then of course the assets process, and so on. So, but I just wanted to make that point on the record because it was a bit surprising. Well, it wasn't more than that. It was more surprising to see that had been taken out of the objects of Skeggs Redlands Limited, the company.
Could I get Max to tell you a little subject he raised today that I can't remember he ever raised, but it showed him what was the method we were running the school with. Max, you might like to, that little comment you made.
Which wisdom from John Lang was that?
No, it was
Talk
yours.
about $1 million. Your story, that one story.
Well, I think you're referring to the fact that the very first morning that Redlands owned ACPE, John Lang was sitting in the CEO's office with me, and I was showing him on the computer the fact that the previous owners had not wiped off the last year's financials. So John said, well, show me the financials. So I hit up the profit and loss account and the balance sheet. And within about a minute of looking at it, John Lang turned to me and he said, this is the first thing I want you to do. Cut off $1 million of expenses from the profit and loss account.
Practical, very practical.
And he was clairvoyant because that year, which was the first year, we made a $500,000 profit.
Yeah.
But that was part of our thrust. It was business. And we were giving them all the education they needed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that sort of makes it very clear that by the time we got to the 2000s, Redlands then had Redlands House, right from the beginning, 3 years old to 4 years old to early 5, right through primary school, then the secondary school, and then the tertiary institution, to which some very, very memorable members of Skeggs Redlands, students of Skeggs Redlands, went, whom I met on speech nights, for example, or not speech, graduations at ACPE, including one of my own nephews. And had ACPE not done what it did for him, he wouldn't today be one of the senior officers of the Australian Football, AFL. He's responsible for the work that's done at Sydney Cricket Ground. I think they had their main headquarters. He's only in his early 30s, but he is grateful for what ACPE was able to do. And I think that that's, in the end, just to make it very clear, the Redlands model was from early childhood, cradle to grave would be the parallel sort of political view, from the early childhood right through to tertiary. Didn't have to be that way, but that's what we were able to achieve. That's what we've managed to do. And it was also one continuous financial model, John, I think, wasn't it? It was all, I had a look at the accounts this week, and there were contributions from all the elements of the Redlands group were in the annual accounts.
Yes, we, if I remember rightly, we may not have done towards the end, but every class contributed a major account.
Yes.
To the school, so it was measured up. I can tell you at one stage there were 2 classes we should have closed.
Yes.
One was 3rd form and one was Form 9 and Form 11.
Yes.
Now, could you imagine if you closed Form 11 out and didn't run a class for them because it wasn't profitable?
Not good.
And that was the thing we ran our business on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it was very clear. What I had to learn coming out of an English history, Latin and divinity background, what I had to learn, and on the first budget meeting with Mr. Roberts and Mr. Lang, I learned how to do basic mathematics again because I was doing the wrong calculation across the desk. It was very embarrassing. I didn't know what 50% meant. I thought it was 5%. Anyway, it was nuts. So we just didn't do too well. But it was intriguing to see that the junior school, at one stage, the junior school was working to subsidise parts of the senior school. Equally, however, a lot of those young people had been in junior school in the first place and had come through. So thinking of it as a continuum was the way I had to think of, well, as a personal thing, I had to think about it. Continuum from early childhood right through to year 12 and then, of course, into ACPE. So that's the sort of sketch of where it all, the sort of thing that happened. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes? Now, the more difficult aspect that you may or may not wish to discuss or to speak about. It wasn't easy to do. Clearly, it wasn't easy to do. From a personal point of view, obviously, the power that I felt in Redlands, from the headmastering point of view, say in the mid-80s through to the end of my time, was the parent power of the school. To see the annual spring fair on the front quad on a Saturday, the giving of the Mercedes bus, if you remember, John, a very expensive vehicle, but it had Skeggs Redlands on the side of it, and it was, as John Lang said, it's driving all over our constituency. And fantastic, given by the parents. I think given by the parents. Is that correct? The original Big Bertha bus costing $15,000.
The general manager of Mercedes, who was the deputy chairman of Darlinghurst.
That's right, yes.
A very close personal friend.
Yes, that's right. There wasn't any discount though.
No.
That's
all right.
But we bought the first Bertha, the big Bertha bus, the first public, the first very big vehicle, 57-seater, from Phil Gilbert, I think it was, or Gilbert, someone,
yes.
For $15,000. And that was an enormous decision, if you remember, at board. But it was a way of taking the school out of the front quad, essentially, and getting things moving. She was beautiful to drive, but never actually steered correctly. It was a really serious problem for a vehicle of that size. But the parent power, the giving, the winter school, the high country campus, the Redlands Association, all of that parent strength in those years was bluntly, it was extraordinary and amazing to see. It wasn't new. So the more difficult side, it was difficult for you to achieve that goal, 74 through to 80 and beyond. Are there things that need to be mentioned about those difficulties that you'd like to mention?
I've got two things that I would like to come into. But the first one is, you know, at the end of 6 years, we had to organise ourselves that we had broken even. 2 years of losses, 2 years of break even, and then 2 years of small profits. I'm just reminded that at the end of 6 years, when we went to look at our money to gather up and say, could we go in and say we're ready to make a bid for the school, Marcia reminded me that the money they had gathered together to start paying for a swimming pool, which the Mother's Canteen was going to finance, was whipped off them by the board because we needed the money to pay the bit. And I'd forgotten all about this, to be perfectly honest, so I say with all sincerity, I apologise.
That was to pay the front yard.
The pool.
That was paving the front yard of the school.
Oh, was that where it was going to go? Okay. Well, anyway, all I know is we zapped the money off them, and the generals agreed with us. However, I did want to touch base on something else. I became very caught up in the AGM of 2017, I think it was, and I had not learned about all of the diocese as imputations into our articles of association. I'd like to just touch base on it now, if I may. Over the years, we've had a multi-purpose set of directors to manage our business, and I use that word literally. We had, as you know, church directors. We had 4 of those. We had 4 directors who were full-time directors, and we had 4 one-year term directors who were only provincial directors. So, you know, we haven't had the right set of directors to manage us. And in my opinion, some have been appointed for the wrong reasons, and I'm not aware from where the recommendations for those 3 current style of directors were offered. I suspect, however, because of the 3 levels that were involved, and it was from the diocese. After 40 years of existence, it is time to restructure to a basically common director of management, all dedicated to the same purpose of responsibility. The requirements in my mind that we should adopt, and I say that for Redlands, we need to provide is education and development is our first responsibility. Secondly, our business and financial performance. Thirdly, community relationships, and 4, that we have the right leadership. And when you put those 4 together, that's the style of director we ought to be having. These members should only be recruited from members of the school's membership. They should only be appointed for terms of up to 3 years, but entitled to 3 terms before resignation. They should be selected from different parishes within the diocese. And I say that because if we're going to get a mix, we don't want them all out of one school. It should be noted that school parents may come from community members of any community within the diocese, but school directors ought to be selected only from Anglicans. It is desired or intended that Anglican parish clergy, new men and women, will be granted school discounts, and that they may well be suited or invited to become school directors. This commitment is intended to ensure the clergy may be invited to corporate membership, whereas appointment by members of the DSO, the SBS,
SDS.
yes, yeah,
is avoided to ensure there are no conflicts of interest develop, and that is very important. We should be careful also that all directors are entitled to 3 years term of office, and we eliminate 1 year provisional term directors, because the directors we want from the school parent group ought to be members who have 3 out of each of those 4 leadership qualities and be part of our program. So I leave that up because that will come up for discussion, Peter.
Yes, indeed.
And
Thanks. Thank you. Could I ask you, John?
Yes.
Well, John and Bruce, as you are aware, you are more aware than anybody else, but the advice, the legal advice received in writing,
Yes.
and to be yet confirmed and so on, is that the SDS position, putting it very carefully because it's a legal issue, but the SDS position on the board is not secure at the present time for reasons that have to do with the history of things.
yes,
It's been a nightmare from my point of view, because during the time I worked for the school, the secretariat membership, the board members, were almost without exception superb. And I'm thinking of Lady Knight, for example, as a classic example of the sort of SDS secretariat member. But it has been worrying to me whether the people, yourselves, who brought the school back to life, whether there is a view that the church, any church membership of the board is essential to the board.
no.
No.
In my opinion, we bought the school lock, stock and barrel, and that's in a statement by
Yes.
O'Halloran, as you will remember. However, we have to accept that the majority of the church directors who've been nominated are good people in their own rights. They all preach good sermons, I guess. Don't know if they know anything about business or anything like that, but that doesn't matter. Lady Knight was a wonderful person, and that cuts across another statement I've written just recently. When I talk about the diocese wanting to run us, but they have no guidance. For example, I well remember the chair lady from the church who is an English mistress at Shaw, didn't have a clue about what she was on about. She taught English, I understand, but she certainly didn't understand, but she did teach me one thing. She taught me Mercedes were pretty good, because she stopped me in the middle of a speech one night I was doing, and she said, "Got to ask you this, do you drive a Mercedes?" "I believe you do." And I said, "What the hell's that got to do with this?" You know, and the next thing they were out praying for me out under the trees at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that's I have my mixed feelings about those sorts of people being appointed directors.
Yes.
And I did make a statement in another little place that the directors, the first set, in my opinion, weren't working for us. They were working for the diocese. So that could be part of the problem that we have about our different issues.
Yes.
Which brings me back to then the other thing, that one of the things we have to suggest in the curriculum, not the curriculum, the constitution, is that the people who are directors of our school, the people who are carers of our school, the people who are responsible for the monies of our school, and they only appoint us to do that job, need to be part of the school fraternity. And I say that sincerely. Now, that shouldn't say if you're a parish priest of St Peter's, where we now go, which wasn't allowed in my time, but if you do it now, it's good fun. But you may not get the right person from there. So I just want to go back and say here the need for an extraordinary general meeting that Skeggs Redlands Limited needs to have in the foreseeable, together with the current board and any of the parent members that are in.
Yes.
Because at a meeting conducted on August the 10th, 1979, between the parent body and the Sydney Diocese members consisting of Dr Andrews and Mrs Carey, Laward and Roberts of the parents and Mrs Cameron, Lambert and King from the diocese. They said, the diocese people, it is recorded that firm common ground appeared to have been reached on banking negotiations, details about the continuance of the school and Redlands to assist in the sale of specific cottages. I don't remember that, but anyway. Data on all other properties, including the school premises, and other data about Redlands' financial obligations to the diocese via the Glebe Board, Skeggs Limited if appropriate, and the diocese if appropriate. The firm common ground then had a further factor table which indicated that Redlands Us would be regarded as an acceptable purchaser subject to certain amendments of Articles of Association to provide power for the church to appoint 1/3 of the board directors, vote the appointment, removal of principal, control the practice of religion, and sundry flow-on amendments which also will be applied. And that amongst the fourth item is the item that says that at all election factors being applied, and I think they said something about if it was asked to be done, that it had to be done with the diocese having 50% plus one other vote of the voting rights accorded to them. Now I say that, then on page 31, I've got to say John documented in his 30-page document, it states that at the end of para 1 that we had no choice but to accept reluctantly. And I say that because to me, I didn't really understand or know it, and I looked up the date particularly, why wasn't my name on that committee? The meeting was going to meet with the church and all that stuff. And then I found out I was in South Africa at that time. One of the flow-on items from item 4 is the imposition of the Special Clause 38 enacted by the diocese. Now, I don't think they had the right to do that because in today's business documentations, there is a need required that if there is a conflict of interest that is going to arise from this transaction, then it has to be declared, and it could be that you're asked to leave the room and not be in the discussions. That's a standard legal practice, I understand. Now, if I'd been there, I think I'd have been thrown out because I think I would have objected to that. And maybe today we wouldn't know the school, but that doesn't matter. I think to control the voting results of the new parent-owned and operated corporation, we need to get that with the current board and away from the diocese and ask them to drop their things unless they want us to bring up the malfeasance sort of issues that we're happy to keep out of the way. And I say that because it's now happened 2 years running. I can speak now about 2017 because I was there, and when I was challenged with it, I said, no, that's not right. It's a trade restriction, and I think it's going to come out. So I'm putting that in this discussion as a starting point that we won't skip over, but I'm sure we won't.
Not at all, no.
I have only just witnessed this usage, and Peter, I think you've seen it in 2018,
Yes.
when it was used by our new chairwoman. 2 days experience, 4 days experience as a standard right, but proven her ineptness and of being a continuance of church practices of past years. You know, yesteryear stuff with the church is not for us anymore, so I'll give you that too,
Thank you.
Peter.
John, for us who were not there,
Yep.
and I'll come to John Robertson
But I'm
first.
happy to do it.
Yeah, no, for us who were not there at the time,
Yep.
the discussion has been very strongly about whether you men, if I can put it, the families,
Yes.
thought that the purchase of the school, finalised in 1995 or whatever date is appropriate. Well, it was the 10-year after the
79 on.
Yes.
Yes. And
Whether,
we paid the mortgage off earlier.
right. Yeah, indeed. But there was a 10-year contingent responsibility, and that was finished in
It sure was.
95, I think. Whether the thought was that the church would be there anyway, no matter what the money or the purchase or anything else, did the church then have, any church, but the Anglican Church in this case, the diocese, have the right to be on the board anyway?
No, they did not.
Right.
I could tell you this. Back in 76, 75, when the lawyers were drawing up the Articles of Association for us, how could I put that? We had asked for to buy all the assets being the educational assets, the building assets, and also the ownership of the name. So we had a right to skegs. We asked for the right for the crest. We asked for a right for the motto. We asked for a right for the uniform. Now, I find it difficult to think that the diocese would not understand that that's an Anglican school that we were trying to run.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, that was for real.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I go on record on that.
Yes, that's a very, it's a crucial point.
Yes.
John, could I ask you to add anything you'd like to add to it, to John's?
No, that's how it was. They had the whip hand, of course, because they insisted on deciding that any purchase of the school was acceptable.
Yes.
And, John had to speak at a standing committee of the church,
Number 7.
explain what was proposed by us for the school and how it would be run, and to convince them that we were proper people to do it.
You could have walked away then and just said, look, this is all too difficult. Why didn't you walk away?
We didn't have the school.
We didn't.
No, I know, but you could have just said, look, sorry, we're only parents. We're not, forget it. Why did you stick it there? Why did you stick with it?
Because a meeting of parents of the school had elected us to do everything we could to save the school.
Precisely.
That's right. But remember this, when we were invited to the diocese's synod to speak, we were being challenged at that time by the diocesan school system. They said they had the right to have a say to debate the issue about where the school would go.
Really?
And I said, no. That we were not
I've
going
never
to.
heard that before.
Yeah,
Right.
no, that's so right. I'd forgotten about that.
Right.
The diocesan school, which is the low fee paying schools.
Yeah. But you see, John, if I could just, Bruce, I'll come back to you in a moment, Max. But the thing that's exercising the small group of us who've been working with Bob on this is how you and your families actually had the courage to keep going, because it reads like a nightmare of argument, and then in the end, when we hit this, and this is really the court, when we hit the AGM of 2018 and the ballots were already prepared, the whole thing was unnecessary because it was already decided. The people in the room who have a vote were irrelevant.
Yes.
It all just seemed so awful, absurd. So why did you guys keep going?
We kept going because of our wives.
Right.
Yes.
The mother's canteen was the strength of that school.
Yes. Yes. And remains so,
And
actually.
each of our wives had served on it, and we knew how much they had worked for the school.
Yes.
And we were determined that that effort would not be wasted.
Yes. Yes.
The men weren't doing it for the men's sake.
No.
They were doing it for their wives.
Right. And some of those wives were former members of the school anyway, were Redlanders, as it were,
Parents.
and
yes.
parents as well.
Yeah.
They were all parents.
Yes.
They all had served on the mother's canteen,
Yes. Yes.
which held the school together.
Yes.
Including Sir Nicholas Shahady,
Yes.
wife of the governor.
That's right.
And
Yes.
he'd done work in the canteen too.
Yes.
So
He'd been there, had he?
Oh, yes, he'd
Yes.
been there when she couldn't go.
But you see, you see my point about the power of that
Yes.
was a power for good. It was and that's what became clear. You'll enjoy this. You might remember the Sutherland family. Do you remember the Sutherlands in the school? And the first HSC I was there, 81, we had someone in the grounds using a breaking up concrete with a, what do they call it?
Jackhammer.
A jackhammer. Thanks, man. And it was during the English paper. And I didn't hear it. I couldn't hear it because I was up in the... And Mrs. Sutherland appeared at my study door and, was very, very firm about the fact that jackhammer had to stop. And they were doing work on the plumbing, on the sewerage. I said, look, I don't think... She said, you walk down there. So I did. And I got the picture straight away with the power of the mothers of the school. I'll never forget the face of just... Boom. So that was really apparent in the school as a strength, obviously, a huge strength in the school. Bruce, sorry, would you like to add anything?
We had a lot of parent support all the time at school. They were there, they were in groups, raising money or giving money.
Yes, yes.
So it seemed a bit different school to what it is today, where the parents don't seem to be as involved as they were in our time.
Yes. Well, could I just put it to you, in my submission on this last Friday night, and I know how John Lang's going to respond to this, and I understand it, but I put it to them in the submission as one of the final items that a parent of the school, arriving in the school and being in good standing, ought to be able to opt out of membership of the company. It should not be a question of nomination and invitation.
Right.
That there should be, as of right, membership of the company. Now I remember the group that tried to roll the board in my first 3 months or something, all that, but somehow or other, this idea that the parents really are excluded and are only customers is not appropriate, I think. So what do you think, how do you see the membership of the board itself? What do you think is the...
Okay. The membership of the board was...
No, sorry, John. Membership of the company. My apologies.
The board.
Membership of the board, yes.
I don't mind that because the membership was there. That was the management of the place. And we could manage without a general manager, if that's the right way. We could manage without a head of school, if you've got the right way.
Yeah.
And they're trying to do this now with their director of this,
Yes.
the director of that, and that loses me.
Yes.
And that's part of this director thing. We've got to get down and have them managing the school, not playing with the school.
Yes, yes.
So I think we've got to do that. But if you have parents who are dedicated to the school or the role, that perhaps not the school, the role that they're appointed to, you've got to give them that trust. And by the way, if they don't perform, you just over the side without a splash.
Yes, yes.
So there's no problem about that.
But my perception, if I just cut across, my perception of Redlands in the time I was there is that the parents were dedicated to their children.
Yes.
Is that not?
Absolutely.
That was the motivation, wasn't it?
That's how we got up Jindabyne and all that place,
Yeah.
because that was the parents.
Yes. Do you think that's fair,
Oh,
John?
yes, that's correct. Absolutely.
So it wasn't the parent as parent for parent, it was the
It
parent
wasn't
as
just
parent
we
for-
three,
Yeah.
because, we could have been thrown out, even when we had the first group from the hospital who trying to give us
That's yes,
buggery there.
yes, yes.
And they were on the wrong track because they were trying to be little socialists.
Well, that was the first time I had the chance to ring you at 11 o'clock at night,
Yes.
because a group of 9 parents gathered in Mrs. Humphrey's old sitting room across from the study. And they then said, would you come and, I was at work, and they said, would you come and just have a word to us? We're proposing to take over the board, and we're proposing this was I won't mention his name, but anyway, this is this guy, you see. And I said, well, not on my patch, so please leave the premises now. And they walked out through the big gate at the front, and I closed the gate and locked it and said to them, look, time to go and hold, if you want to hold meetings, hold them in a motel. This is not the place. And we didn't hear much I remember ringing you, John, to let you know, because I thought that was a pretty awful thing to have done to the parents of the school. Your view, as I remember it, was they're not real parents. They're not.
That's right.
Just forget it. Don't worry
They're
about
not part of us.
it. So that's where. So your
They were
view,
members of the school because they couldn't get into the other schools.
well, that's that. But they were also very difficult
Oh, yeah.
agitators,
Yes.
and they wanted to make the school another Summer Hill, a sort of alternate school.
Yeah.
And I said, look, sorry, but you know, that's when I first mentioned the word Latin to them. So, what do you feel the membership of the company could be? Because the board of directors is responsible technically to the company, whereas now at the moment the board of directors is actually responsible, is it not, to the church? Is that not true? Under the way that the constitution is currently constructed,
No.
and the voting system,
They don't. Well, for the first 25 years, we had no voting system like the
no,
church.
that's right. That's right.
I stand to be thrown out after that, presumably. But as far as we are concerned, it's by show of hands.
Yes.
End of story.
That's how it
No,
should be.
Right. Well, that's the way it was for 25 years.
Yes, yes.
And it means the new people, and Michael Jones, I would hate to think he's standing on that sort of issue.
Yeah.
Because you don't need that. If they won't put their hands up and say yes or no, what the hell, you don't need them.
Yeah.
You don't have to have them as directors. They can still be the kids coming to school if the parents don't want to be directors.
Oh, of course. Yes,
Yeah.
Of course. Of course.
And I hope that, look, you've just got to have it, because families that were around that period of time, they were great people and they served us well. They put up with a lot of things. We did too, as directors. We did a lot of things we would not normally do in our regular lives.
Yeah.
But we did it because we had to accommodate them. But I think we can overcome that issue by having people enjoy life. You know, I could tell you, I started up and became the first international employee of Simplex, and it was worldwide. Now, how do you do that and get on with doing it without being nice to some people? And you know, Kerry tells me today, you don't like that person. I say, yeah. Don't have to like them to work with them.
Stick alongside.
Yeah,
But you'll well recall, I'm sure, that the meetings that we had underneath the assembly hall.
Yes.
When John, you may not have been there, Bruce and John, and Max certainly wouldn't have been there. But John announced that the right way to run Redlands on a day-to-day basis was to have 2 shifts in the school.
Yes.
This was an memorable night, and
Yeah.
so the first shift of school would be from 7 o'clock until
6 to 12,
Yes.
12 to 6, the
Yes.
second shift.
and
And we could have double the student, which would be 4,000.
it was a memorable evening but it was out in and the thing was, the meeting was in that cement area
Yes.
underneath the canteen,
Yeah.
underneath the assembly hall. But do you know, the parent reaction was, oh, that's okay, we'd like to think about that, but there was never any. So for 25 years, even though the regulation or the clause was in the M&As in regard to the voting,
We've never had to use
never
it.
applied.
No.
And in the recent 3 AGMs, it
Yes,
has been
it's been
applied.
applied.
And as I said to these young guys the other day, there is an external power there, which is a problem. That's my opinion.
It's for a different reason.
Yes. Yes.
About that.
That's right.
It's well, kids tell you all sorts of things. It's amazing what they learn de facto wise. And, you know, we had ACPE, we've had these other places. I had St Michael's, St Stephen's up at the Gold Coast, where I went up and helped them for 2 years, getting stuff up. And they had no idea what they're doing. And where did they get the students from? They got them from selling blocks of dirt around the area. So they got that with free schooling for 2 years when they first came in at Form 2. They had a great junior school, but the school's, I believe, gone bankrupt since.
Well, we're running out of time. We're also running out of battery power. But what we want to cover, no, that's a silly thing to say, sorry. What today was to do was what we have tried to do.
Right.
And this will be a future, it's a record now for the future to be edited and enhanced or enlarged or whatever over time. But it really is important at this moment. Anything else that you would like to say? Now I'll start with Max. What is your impression of today? Have you got on the reconstruction of an education business? What do you think?
Well, I came in right at the very end of everything that you've been conversing about today. It makes sense to me what you've been saying, but I don't think I could add anything in relation to the Redlands era.
But the management, in your time at ACPE, the management of the academic imbalance with the financial, or how would you express that, was achieved. That was how that came back to strength. Is that correct?
Well, there were a lot of factors that resulted in the success of the ACPE, but I guess a guiding principle was that the business component and operation of the college was never ever to become secondary to the education component. I tried to keep them about 50-50 because there was strong influence from the academic board where we had professors on that board and from the academic staff to make the curriculum at the college very much like Sydney University. And I kept saying, but Sydney University loses money every year. It's a government institution and it's backed up with big subsidies. This is a private tertiary institution. We have to make our own money and be financially viable. Mm-hmm. And that meant we had to get extra students. We started a particular thing called guided tours, where we invited the parents and the students to come along. And before we took over, the fee rate, the C ratio, that is the student inquiry to enrolment ratio, was 1%. If there was an inquiry at the college, the receptionist would send out an information package, and that was resulting in 1% of inquiries enrolling. The way we did it with the guided tours, we very quickly introduced it to an 80% C rate because of bringing the parents in, showing them the Olympic facilities, a guided tour over the college, afternoon tea, talking to them about the fact that our curriculum was very practical and we were attracting good sports type people, that 30% of our student body were champions who represented Australia at the Olympic level, the Australian level or the New South Wales level, and they'd be mixing with those people, explaining that we had organised bank loans for them, all that sort of thing, and the C rate, or the kill rate if you like, went to 80%. And that was bringing us a huge amount of money. And that's the first jewel in the crown, I think, that made the college successful. The second one, I give credit to you, Peter, was the fact that a few years later you put great pressure on myself to apply to the Commonwealth Government to get the equivalent for our student body of the HEC scheme for those students attending government universities. It was called Fee Help. We got that, and from then on, when our students had access to government funding, we had successfully achieved financial viability, which is what we set out to do.
Thank you. Thank you. I remember delivering the documents to Canberra.
You did. You took it. You put pressure on us to do it in 2 weeks. We handed it to you. You took it out, got in your car. You drove to Canberra. You handed it in yourself, no doubt, with a very strong recommendation, and we were successful.
We got there. And two other points. One, I only did that because you were very tired. And the second was I followed you out on the night you retired from ACPE, and I was devastated by the fact of your retirement, because the achievement of active leadership was so astonishing, and the governance of academics was remarkable. Remarkable. Bruce, anything to add at the end of this?
Well, I'm just wondering who's driving the school now?
Well, we're trying to assess that, because,
Yeah.
look, if I can I speak?
Yes.
My concern is this, okay, and when I first learned of the purchase of real estate in Neutral Bay at 3 times market value, immediately adjacent to the school, and little bits, and that was going to be, is going to be knocked over on a master plan basis to build other buildings for which you have to pay more money, and the school is not going to increase enrolments. My immediate response was, that is really foolish, because that's not why I can operate my own checkbook, for example. So that is of concern, because the fact of the matter is, if you look at, I won't bore on, but look at Cremorne, at Redlands original 2¼ acres, the additions, the Brace Girdle, what was the laneway called? Brace Girdle? You found it in the old documents, John, and we bought it.
Up at Deewhy?
No, the one leading through to Winnie Street.
Oh, okay.
Brace.
Oh, yes, the little...
Braithwaite. The Braithwaite.
Braithwaite.
Yes, and you found it, and we paid $13,000 for the lane, the right of way
Yes.
across from the old Scout Hall to Winnie Street.
Yeah.
But that locked off the block, basically. It was a brilliant move. So, and that taught me a lesson, that you don't actually buy and then necessarily build up. And then we bought various properties, but they've been buying and selling them, and one they sold for X, bought back recently for 3 times X 2 years later. So the question is a very good one, Bruce, and from my practical point of view, I thought this is really red flag stuff, very bad news. New headmaster coming in January, very good news, I imagine. I don't know him at all, of course, obviously. But in the meantime, this new constitution needs to be bedded down, and it needs to be right, for the reasons that, as Bob would say if he were here, your families and you did an enormous service at your own risk and cost.
Yeah.
That should not be forgotten, nor must it allowed to be rolled over.
Right.
So that's the question. Does that make sense? Is that okay?
Well, I just don't know who's leading the school now. Except we have a chairperson. I think she's all right, but I think she needs leadership.
Yes.
And where's that leadership coming from? With the new headmaster coming?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not going to be there.
Well, I think the leadership comes from the joint relationship between the chair and the head of school. That's where your real leadership comes from. And if that's in any way broken, it's a major problem.
Yeah.
Well,
Don't you think?
You've got a
Yes.
head of school who doesn't know the school or the background.
Well, the existing head doesn't know it, apparently.
No.
Well, if you take the Leonard Farl example,
Yeah.
classic model. Thank you, Bruce.
Could I give you something for what it's worth? 3 days after John, Bruce and I had said, yes, we'll go ahead with the program, back in 75, because it was just before we took over running the last term of school. Along came Progress and Properties, an offer to buy the whole school for us, to hold it for 3 years while he got us to use it in its current form, but that he would take that all over and build us on the Deewhy movie theatre, or the outdoor movie theatre, a brand new school, which in 3 years would be brand new, together with its own oval. Now, that was a choice that we could not go ahead with because it was too late. But that could have been there as an option. And we stayed at Cremorne because it was, we believe, the right thing to do. But it could well have changed the whole circumstances.
Of course.
So I think you might like to make a note and speak about that when you got this.
Well, it's now on.
Is it still on?
Yeah, it's still on. Yeah,
okay.
that's why we're running out of time.
Sorry.
Running out of time. But I think the thing is, we would have then lost our most major advertising asset, which is Military Road. And what was it when the bridge came in? It was 80,000 cars a day
Yes.
passing, and very slowly at that. It was very good. And Gerrard Street on the other side. John, is there anything to add? Anything you'd like at the finish? Anything you'd like to say or add?
No, I think our responsibility, if we have any, is to ensure that the school, as is now, owned by membership of Skeggs Redlands Limited, and they are parents, that should continue.
Yes.
That the parents should continue to exercise ownership rights
Yeah.
and not allow any influence to come in from outside, like from SDS.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, closing, anything, Max?
Well, you did ask
Sorry,
me, you asked all
sorry.
the schools where we came from.
Yeah.
I've got an idea of all high schools of not the GPS. And that in itself is one of the best things that happened for us because it led us on to getting the AIS group up. And that's a wonderful contribution.
Absolutely.
And it's equal to our GPS.
Well, I think, John, if I could just parallel that, working for, and I'm putting this on the record of these machines as well, working for Jika Travers at Shaw was a special thing to do. Not easy, because he was a very, very, in my view, a brilliantly difficult man. But he once made the point that a particular generation of Australians did not go through 39, 40 to 45, 46 in order to, he said this in my study in the United Kingdom actually, to these young British guys who were in my study at the time. We didn't do that in order to have you people blow it apart, blow it up. And it was very, very clear. And I was embarrassed at the time. I thought, oh, Jika, please, but it is absolutely fair and correct that a particular, and this is Bob's point, a particular generation of parents at Redlands saw the failure, came to the party and came to the workplace, as it were, and you once said, John, you guys, you three were moonlighting in your own business lives and keeping food on the table anyway, but established the basis on which the school still now operates and is thriving.
Yes.
And has all these external elements such as winter school, high country campus,
Yes.
SMGS, not to be undone is really the point, I think.
Yeah.
So that's really the message from Bob. Is there anything else, John?
No,
Anything?
I agree.
John? Bruce? Max?
Yes, I would just like to say that I started with Redlands and I had 10 years out the ACPE and I learnt heaps. Even at that age, I learnt heaps. Particularly, it was due to the Redlands influence.
Yes.
And I would specifically like to nominate the people who I learnt heaps from. John Lang, Bob Dunnett, and Peter Cornish. And to each of you, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
On behalf of Bob, thanks, Max. Thank you very much. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Are you still there, Mus? You still there? We'll close at that, guys. Thank you very much indeed for the
Thank
for
you
the work.
also for what you're doing. I'm sure Peter, Bob will be talking to you.
Yes. No, it was been fantastic.